Welcome back to another episode of Sal and Pal Stay at Home and Watch Movies. I'm here with my friend Touly. Say hi, Touly.
Hi, guys.
And today we're going to be reviewing Little Women. And just a fair warning, there's going to be spoilers up ahead, so you've been warned. Jo March reflects back and forth on her life, telling the beloved story of the March sisters, 4 young women, each determined to live their life on their own terms. My first pro is this movie has an amazing cast. We have star power for days. We have Saoirse Ronan, we have Emma Watson, Florence Pugh, Laurence Dern, Timothy Chalamet, Bob Odenkirk, Meryl Streep, and more. These people make the characters in the movie and the story pop out at you and sort of ignore the small blemishes in the movie. The quality of these actors have been determined way long before these. So once you notice these people in the movie and the quality they bring to it, it kind of just makes the movie step up to a different level. My next point is I love how they went from the past to the present by using bright color palettes for the past and more dull tone colors for the present for certain characters, such as Jo, Beth, and Lori. Also, I want to touch upon the lighting. It was really interesting how they used brighter lighting to represent the past versus the present. Also, I want to give props to the filmmakers for taking the risk to film with natural lighting. I know that this is a hard thing to do and hard to control, but it made the movie so much better for me. And I understand that this movie was also filmed in 35mm and not digital. This was really nice and it made it so much more enjoyable for me. Next point, each character has their own storyline and is well developed. And yes, I understand that this is based on a book, so it's already preset, but I'm talking about how the writer and director, Greta, took the book and transferred it into a movie, which is hard to do nowadays. And I'm looking at you, Wrinkle in Time and Bloodshot, and she made it work. And I felt invested in each and every character, but mostly I felt more invested in Beth and Jo. And I believe that the movie for me was centered around those two characters. Now for the last point, the ending. I really loved the way the director Greta finished the movie by pick your own ending format. For me, I felt I know which ending both Greta and Alcott would have really wanted. First, let's revisit Jo's conversation with her mother near the end of the movie when she was in the attic, when she says,
I just feel like women, they have minds and they have souls as well as just hearts, and they've got ambition and they've got talent as well as just beauty. And I'm so sick of people saying that love is just all a woman is fit for. I'm so sick of it. But I'm so lonely.
With this and combined at the end when she's sitting down negotiating the book deal and says,
well, I suppose marriage has always been an economic proposition, even in fiction.
And this statement has been backed up by her sister Amy when she talks to Lori back in Europe and says,
and as a woman, there's no way for me to make my own money. Not enough to earn a living or to support my family. And if I had my own money, which I don't, that money would belong to my husband the moment we got married. And if we had children, they would be his, not mine. They would be his property. So don't sit there and tell me that marriage isn't an economic proposition, because it is. It may not be for you, but it most certainly is for me.
These two things from two different characters bring the idea that women back in this times could not set their own path and could not basically be well off by themselves. And even her aunt basically told them, you must marry wealth, because if they couldn't strive to live on their own. And for me, when you put all this together and you revisit the endings, it just brings it more into a different perspective of that time. Now, with that in mind, let's recap the two endings and revisit them and see how these two endings could possibly work or not have worked. The first ending, we see Jo chase after Frederick and they kiss, which leads to the scene of the school opening, and we see Jo walking out into the garden and passing her students and family members and loved ones. And we also see Frederick there, which hints that he might have stayed to teach at the school by being friends with Jo or marrying her, the latter being the most likely in this scenario. Then we also have the second ending when we see Jo negotiating the book deal, and the first ending is the ending in her book, and we see her watching through the glass as a new dad would be watching a baby in the nursery in the hospital. She is watching her book being born, and then we see her holding the book close to her heart, which drives the point home that she has made her own economic proposition without getting married and not giving up on her dream or Beth's dream. Clearly, there isn't a right or wrong choice here. You can either choose path 1 or path 2 for your true ending, but for me, the second ending is a true ending, and I base it on the quotes of the characters that we just spoke of, Joe and Amy, and also I base it on Alcott's post-life after she wrote the book. But it's up to you. That's why Greta had these 2 endings, so you can pick your ending which most suits your life. So now moving on to my cons. Not many, but if I had to pick any, I would say the girls' age or the actresses, especially Amy, Florence Pugh. There were some scenes that just felt kind of creepy, like when she first meets Lori and says, "Hi, I'm Amy." That scene for me felt really weird. She's older but trying to play a younger girl. For me, I would have casted younger people for the past roles and then stuck with the cast for the present older roles. But I guess that's how you do it in plays. So why not if you're making a movie based off a play, based off a book? So next point, I guess, would be the length of the movie. It's a bit long, but there's not much to cut. But if I would cut a few things, I would say I would cut some of the ballroom scenes, maybe Amy's time in Europe. Other than that, there's not much cons in this movie that I would say bothered me. So I guess with that, I would pass it on to my friend Touly to see how he saw the movie and what grade he gave the movie.
To preface my review of the movie, I don't know if the film was based off a novel or some sort of source, so please consider that as I'm talking about strictly the film and how I saw it. And so with that, I'm gonna kind of be a little all over the place because I feel like this is how I'm gonna tie everything together. First, to touch upon what Sal said about the length of the film. For me, I maybe can understand why it was that long, because there were a lot of characters in this film that I suppose the film wanted to give attention to, so that we as an audience feel for them when they sort of experience that moment in the film that would give them some sort of highlight. I could kind of understand that. I think Sal said that this movie was, at least to him, more about Joe and Beth. For me though, I would have preferred if the movie just centered more around Joe, in which the movie does head in that direction, but it doesn't feel to me that there was enough context important moments with Joe being the person in the forefront. And so for me, I thought a method that they could have handled this was to have Joe and the editor that she was trying to get her book published from. I thought the interactions between these 2 characters should have had a very big spotlight so that we get to see the 2 very big and different perspectives that the movie was trying to push on the audience. And Sal already kind of alluded to this. Joe wanted to be an independent person despite being a woman, because as she was iterating towards the end of the film, where she kind of broke down, that although she does feel lonely, that she had ambition. As a woman, she had ambition, she had dreams, she's capable of doing all of these other things that are not part of the status quo, in general, just marriage. And for me, I sort of would have had the editor represent that concept, which he totally was, because he was being very demanding of Joe to have that ending where the 2 characters of interest then, how they were going to end up together in the end. To have had that conversation throughout the entire film as we just drop in certain moments that happen between the sisters, I thought would have been a more effective way of going about this, because then we have the present time where Joe and the editor is sort of talking about what Joe had already written or is about to write or is about to change based on how the editor felt, and maybe Joe being able to convince him otherwise at certain points that, what, this might be a better direction because I feel this way because this happened to me or my sisters, and to just get that conversation always happening. And as it is, then we just get, flashbacks to when these sort of situations happen so that we can see things unfold. If something comes about where the editor is not completely on board or he's not understanding, then you will just get a sudden interruption. It's like, whoa, wait here, Joe. What you said there, I don't quite understand. Can you elaborate on that? And of course, then we'll get put back into the present scene and have the conversation, and we'll just get this back and forth. We start with Joe in the film going to the editor, and at the end of the film, we have Joe leaving the office, having the book being given the green light to be published and whatnot. And then you see what happens with her starting up the school and stuff. I would have preferred it that way because it felt like some parts of the film were missing transitions that made me pause for a bit to think what had just happened there. An example was when Beth contracted that scarlet fever and she got well. Like, I thought like it went away or something, which led into that Christmas gathering. And then the scene right after that, we come to find out that Beth had died. And I'm thinking to myself, wait, I thought she got better. Where did this come from? Like, out of left field. Like, there wasn't anything that happened. Like, for example, if we have just had some indication that Beth had not fully recovered from this fever to when we find out that she had died, despite the gap of time that transpired in between, I wanted something to sort of fill in me on that versus Joe. I think the scene was Joe walking down the stairs and seeing the mother in tears. And I'm thinking to myself, wait, why is she crying? Like, to me, it didn't make sense. Until then, I have to, think about it. It's like, oh, okay, so Beth died and I guess she didn't really recover. I can see that, but there was that missing context in between that made me put one and one together immediately. And this happened a couple of times throughout the film. Like another example, which kind of deals with pacing, as Sal and I have talked about before, having certain things sort of cook over time to build up suspense, just to ensure that the resolution to said issue that just happened would sort of have a payoff. And this brings me to the scene where Amy destroyed some of Joe's items. And of course, Joe being in the right here of being angry at Amy and not wanting to forgive her. And so after that scene, we get the sisters down by the dining area, and as Amy comes down to join them, Joe doesn't want any part of her until Lori arrives, and then they go off and do their thing. And then Amy is feeling awful about what she did to Joe, and then the sisters told her to go after her. And of course, it leads her down to that frozen lake where she ended up falling down into, which caused Joe and Lori to come and rescue her. And then all was forgiven. Understandably so, because something traumatic happened. But again, there was that context or that transition in between when Joe was feeling angry towards Amy, and then the resolution just happening right after. There was a gap in between where I thought, had they just sit on this for a bit, just let me know that over such amount of duration that has gone by, that Joe had not forgiven Amy about this. She's still holding a grudge. Just more examples of how Joe was reacting to Amy until it got to a point where Amy was very desperate to get back on Joe's side. And then this ended up with Amy falling into that frozen lake and then Joe rescuing her to allow her to forgive her. Then yeah, I'm all on board with that. Which then, of course, then contributes to the overall duration of the film. Maybe they didn't want to push it any further than what it was currently, because it was already over that 2-hour mark. Maybe by expanding on some of these ideas or these scenes, that it would have just made the movie even that much longer. So maybe the duration of the film sort of was working against them based on the number of characters they had and how much of a spotlight they wanted to give to each of these characters. So I guess as a negative, I thought the pacing then was sort of affected by that. The characters, again, they were fine. If more time were given to some of the other sisters other than Joe, then I would have appreciated them probably as much as I did Joe. But because Joe, to me, is the star of this group because of her mentality of wanting to break the status quo, that idea alone was the concept that was encouraging me to keep watching the movie. It's like I wanted to see how Joe was going to react to this, like how she was going to overcome some of the things that the status quo have already set in place so that she kind of stays true to who she is and what she's trying to overcome and what she's trying to imbue into the culture down the road. Had they just focused that much more on Joe's character and minimized the other character to a point where Joe is just reflecting on them as she's telling the editor through the book that she has written about what these characters were doing, to sort of emphasize some of the ideas that she feels as an individual of wanting to be more than just a woman who just praises the idea of love and marriage, and for the editor to kind of see it from her perspective and buy into the ideas or the concept that she's infusing into the book. Granted, he is a businessman and he wants the book to sell, and because of that, I can understand why Joe agreed to the terms of the marriage happening in the book itself. But I personally feel that Joe had the upper hand because it was the daughter of the editor who wanted to find out what happened at the end of the book. I felt like Joe kind of had the upper hand there, which she kind of did in terms of negotiating the terms of the profits that she would be receiving. But in terms of like what happened in the book, I feel like she sacrificed what she wanted to go for in order to to obtain the finance in order to help her get her ideas across through the schooling that she opened up. It's a give and take there, and I respect Jo for having done that, because if she had not agreed to the editor's term, then, her book might have not gotten published, and, the finance would not have been there to propel her ideas into the real world. So Jo is easily my favorite character in this film, and I love the stance that she had in terms of trying to break the status quo, but I just wish the film would have just focused on that a lot more and have that be the driving force, and just have the sisters sort of fill in. That's how I would have preferred it. But in terms of the overall concepts of the film, the potential, it had to have been told in other spotlights to maybe elevate some of the ideas that it had. They were all there. The movie definitely was not bad. It was a decent watch. As I mentioned earlier, I thought maybe pacing was sort of off. It then affected maybe some of the scenes that could have been added or deleted, some of the characters that could have had more of a spotlight on that didn't, ideas that could have been maybe handled a little differently just to minimize their concepts, so that other concepts that I felt were more important could have been more in the spotlight. Again, it's one of those give or take sort of thing. Maybe it was one of those films where it was trying to do too much with the amount of duration they wanted the film to sort of fall under. So I think if they have maybe simplified some of the stuff, and again, focused more on Jo being the driving force, the perspective that we're getting all of these different ideas from, I think for me, I would have enjoyed the film that much more. In the end, I'm going to give the film a 7 out of 10.
I'm just going to put it out there. My favorite two actors in this movie was Saoirse Ronan and Timothy Chalamet. The chemistry they had was amazing, and some of the lines they delivered were really impactful, especially from Saoirse, coming from that stance that Touly talked about, that she wanted to do it on her own and the status quo that she wanted to break. To me, that's basically the driving force between this movie, and how she had to reject Timothy, which was the character Laurie. She had to reject him to basically strive for her goal. She had to give up what we see as love to stay focused on her main goal to break the status quo. That by itself kind of, for me, made the movie. And Beth was, for me, the glue that held the family together. Because if it wasn't for Beth, the family would have broken apart. So for me, that's the whole thing about this movie, the past, the present, and the future. And the idea of the lighting, and also how they showed the colors and everything. That's how you can distinguish the past and the present. That worked so great. And I have to give it up to the director, Greta. Amazing work. I'm also going to probably give it 7.5 out of 10 for this movie. Maybe close to an 8, but it's just closer to 7.5. And I guess that wraps it up for this review of Little Women. Please join us next time where we're going to review Dr. Dolittle.
Have you been here before? The Queen's told me all about it. It's a most unusual place.
I'm prepared for anything.
Wonderful. A gorilla answering the door.
Please like, comment, and subscribe. You can find our social media links below. And like always, keep watching movies.